this is not in our questions, but I'm going to ask it. How do we break down the dividing wall between? I just think there's urban churches and youth ministries, there's
Hmm.
suburban, and it feels
Hmm.
like an Ephesians 2 scenario. You know,
Yeah.
how do we have you seen that happen at all? And how can we really work together? My buddy Derwin Gray is always talking about building multi-ethnic
Hmm.
churches, where we can, where there's, multi ethnicities. How do we build churches like that? And how do we get youth leaders from the suburbs and the city,
Yeah.
like, working together?
Yeah. Well, I think number one, this is going to sound like a Captain Obvious statement, but youth leaders need to ask themselves, do you want to stay relevant or not? I mean, because
Mm,
culture is evolving, Greg, it's ever evolving. And whether we like it or not, it is what it is. We have a responsibility not to just see
mm,
or assess the data, we have a responsibility to respond to the data. So I think the culture at large, what I've seen is the culture at large has already become a mesh up society where it's no longer about black, white, Latino, Native American, Asian, or Hispanic or Latino. Man, it's not about different ethnic divisions. I mean, there are some ethnic differences that yes and cultural differences that are there, but it's not about ethnicity as much as it is what I call common ills. There are things that every kid, regardless of their ethnicity,
mm,
they're dealing with that ties them together,
mm.
fatherlessness being one of them.
Yeah.
When I wrote the book Everybody's Urban,
Mm,
what brought me to that title, Greg, was I was telling a buddy of mine who was a student pastor at a very affluent suburban church about the context and the premise of the book. And I was saying, man, a lot of my kids, one of the categories I'm talking about, I was talking about identity and sexuality and all that stuff. But I was talking about fatherlessness, and I was talking about the psychological uh, um, impact that an absent father
mm.
has brought to students in our youth group. And I talked about it from the standpoint of a girl and a boy. And I talked about, man, his presence impacts, how they see themselves, interact, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So he sits back in his chair and he says, Jeff, man, I have the same issues in my suburban context. And I'm like, man,
Mm,
get out of here. You have folks with seven-figure salaries in your church. And he's like, yeah, I know, but the fathers in my church, they're businessmen and they travel, and so they're not there. So what they do is they are present on paper, but not present in spirit. And
yeah.
they substitute presence and gifts for presence and love. And so the
Yeah.
byproduct of that emotionally
Mm,
and psychologically, some of the things that your students in your urban context are dealing with, my students in a suburban context are dealing with. And I was like, wow. And so that's where it kind of started the concept that everybody's urban. So I
yeah.
think, Greg, one of the things that we as leaders need to understand is that until we divorce ourselves from an antiquated approach of seeing youth ministry, we won't become truly the
Mm,
multi ethnic, not multicultural, but multi ethnic youth ministry that this generation, especially the emerging generation that's not just Gen Z, but the generation that's coming behind Gen Z that's in children's ministry right now, man, we got to understand we need to update our curriculum. We need to update our strategy. We need to update our resources and books and our approach to ministry because culture is changing. We just need to keep up with the time.
yeah. That's really good stuff, and I think it's really important. I've always said, yeah, I never had a dad. I didn't know my dad, but in some ways, I think it'd be harder to have a dad who wasn't there emotionally, like,
Hmm.
didn't care, like that.
Yeah,
That'd be really hard, you know.
yeah,
So I love
yeah.
that. Everybody's urban. That's the name of the book.
Yep, everybody's
Yeah.
urban. Yeah, and so we talk about it's like this mesh up society that culture is in right now, where it is. And actually, what's crazy is I wrote it. I feel like I wrote it almost 10 years too early, right?
Oh,
And I started seeing some like right now. If I would have wrote it today, man, it probably would be a bestseller.
yes.
And
Just
but
revise and update it. Revise and
oh,
update it. Yeah, yeah.
oh, as soon as I
It's
finish my
time.
PhD, that's exactly what I'm gonna do. And so,
Am I going to
but yeah,
have to
man.
call
So
you Doctor Jeff Wallace? after that?
No, man, I'll still be Jeff, your brother. And so, yeah, but no, man. So yeah, it is. You're spot on, Greg, and what you're saying, and it's so important that we acknowledge the truth that, um, kind of, if I can say this right here without getting in trouble. Hey, if you're a white dad, your daughter might like a black boy, right? And because they
Hmm.
don't see color, they see common connection. You know what I mean? And I think that is the thing that, as we see culture evolve in student ministry in particular, man, we're going to have to be honest about the times so that we can respond accordingly.